Chapter 1. The Betrayal They Thought I'd Never See. I spent most of my life believing that loyalty was a form of protection, that if you showed up early, stayed late, and gave your best years to the same place, you would be safe. My name is Nora Kingsley. I'm 45 years old, and that belief nearly erased me. The people I trusted took my work and quietly removed my name, while the people who loved me told me it would be easier to stay silent. They said it wasn't worth the fight. They thought silence would keep me whole. What none of them understood was that I wasn't staying quiet because I was weak. I was staying quiet because I was watching. That belief followed me into every job I ever had. I used to believe that if you showed up early, stayed late, and kept your head down, good work would protect you. I believed loyalty was a kind of currency. I believed if I built something strong enough, no one could pretend it belonged to them. That was the story I told myself for most of my adult life. In 2010, I left a steady job in St. Louis for a smaller cybersecurity firm outside Chicago. The title was modest, the promise was big. They said they wanted builders, not showmen. They said they were tired of smoke and mirrors. I was 31, newly married, and still naive enough to think a workplace could feel like family without asking you to pay for it later. The company was called Northgate Security. The office sat in Downers Grove, near a stretch of chain restaurants and winter bare trees. Back then, there were fewer than 30 employees. We ate lunch in the same cramped kitchen, we argued over the best way to handle an intrusion, and then helped each other clean up the mess. I liked that. I liked being useful more than being seen. The CEO, Wade Kessler, was the kind of man who made you feel chosen. He remembered small details. He thanked people in hallway conversations. He talked about ethics like it was part of the business plan. Over time, as the company grew, those hallway conversations got shorter. The thanks became rarer. The ethics stayed in the slide decks. I climbed slowly and steadily. Not because I could not move faster, but because I kept getting pulled into the work that mattered most. Systems that were old and brittle, clients that were panicking, a weekend incident that needed calm hands. I did not mind it. I took pride in being the person who could hold the line when things got loud. By 2021, we were no longer a small firm. We had a board. We had investor updates every quarter. We had a marketing team that could turn any feature into a headline. Wade started talking about going bigger. He talked about due diligence, valuation, and eventual IPO. He said we needed one product that would make investors lean in. That product became Sentinel. Sentinel was not a miracle. It was a system built from 1,000 quiet choices, the kind you only see if you have been in the trenches long enough to respect boring reliability. It was designed to spot threats early and contain them before damage spread. It took 2.5 years to build it into something I would trust. It took nights that blurred into mornings. It took birthdays I promised I would make up later. It took dinners eaten standing up at the counter, laptop open, my husband watching me with a half smile that did not reach his eyes. My husband, Cole, is patient in the way only a person who loves you can be. He never demanded I stop, but he started asking smaller questions. Are you okay? Are you sleeping? Do they see what you were doing? I would tell him yes, I would tell him it was worth it, and I believed myself when I said it. The morning everything shifted, I arrived early as usual. It was February 2024. The sky was the dull gray of the Midwest in winter, heavy and close. The parking lot was quiet. Inside, the lobby smelled like fresh cleaner and the faint bite of coffee from the machine by reception. My badge beeped, the door clicked, and I walked toward the second-floor conference room with a paper cup warm in my hand. The meeting invite had landed in my inbox the night before. Strategy alignment, mandatory, leadership only. The attendee list included legal. Legal. That one word tightened something in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like a warning. When I entered, most seats were already taken. Our operations chief, Tessa Ward, sat near the center with her notebook open, eyes down, expression careful. She was 46 and smart enough to survive any room by never being the first to speak. Beside her sat our in-house counsel, Monica Hale, 49, polished and still, the kind of person who could make a sentence sound like a contract without raising her voice. Wade stood at the front of the room with a remote in his hand. He was 53 now, still charismatic, still smooth. Next to him was a man I did not recognize, dressed sharper than the rest of us, with the relaxed confidence of someone who lived in boardrooms. When he saw me, he nodded like we had met and I should remember him. Wade smiled when I took my seat. "Morning, Nora." "My name is Nora Kingsley. I'm 45 years old, and I've spent 14 years building systems that keep other people safe." That morning, I felt like a guest in a room I helped build. Wade clicked the remote. The screen lit up with a deck titled Northgate Investor Readiness Roadmap. The first few slides were familiar: growth projections, market opportunity, the same polished language we used every time we wanted someone else to believe in us. Then, slide 3 appeared. Sentinel Platform Overview, presented by Wade Kessler. Presented by. Not led by, not designed by the team, presented by. It looked small, a word most people would gloss over, but I knew what that word was doing. It was a quiet hand moving my name off the table. Wade began speaking in his confident, reassuring voice. He talked about momentum, about leadership, about how proud he was of what we'd accomplished. He clicked to a diagram of Sentinel's architecture. I recognized every line. I had drawn it at 2 in the morning on a week that the demo deadline was brutal and marketing was asleep. He talked through design decisions as if they had been his. I looked around the room waiting for someone to correct it, waiting for Tessa to say, "Nora has been leading this," waiting for Monica to glance up with even a flicker of hesitation, waiting for anyone to show discomfort. No one did. They nodded, they took notes, they stayed quiet in the way people stay quiet when a powerful person is rewriting reality and no one wants to be the first to object. Wade clicked again. A new slide appeared. Organizational alignment. My name sat in a smaller box than it used to. My reporting line was different. My authority narrowed into a thin strip of responsibility without control. Wade said, "We are streamlining ownership. Investors want a single voice. For Sentinel, we need clear accountability at the top." He looked straight at me and smiled, almost kindly. He said, "Nora will remain a critical technical leader, but external product representation will move under my office for the next phase." The room stayed still. Not hostile, not supportive, just still. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, but my hands stayed steady on the table. I hated that my body was cooperating. Part of me wanted to make noise, to force the room to acknowledge the theft happening in plain sight. Instead, I lifted my hand slightly. I said, "I have led Sentinel from the beginning. I built the demo plan and the investor materials with the team. Exactly what changes about my responsibilities starting today?" Wade's expression softened, the way it does when someone is about to offer you an explanation for a decision they already made. He said, "Nothing is being taken from you. This is positioning. This is optics." Optics. Monica finally spoke, voice even and controlled. She said, "There will also be standard updates to align intellectual property and messaging as we move into due diligence, routine paperwork." Routine. Tessa did not look up. Her pen moved across the page as if she were copying down the weather. I asked one more question, quietly, like you ask when you already know the answer matters. I said, "Will this change be documented in writing?" Wade said, "We will follow up after the meeting." Then he clicked to the next slide and continued, as if my question was a pebble he had stepped over. As he talked, I stared at the footer of the deck. It did not match the version I had saved. A timestamp looked wrong. One performance metric on the Sentinel slide was slightly higher than what our latest tests supported. Not wildly, just enough to sound better. Just enough to make an investor smile. My skin prickled. The meeting ended, chairs scraped back, people gathered laptops. Someone touched my shoulder and murmured, "That's rough," like I'd lost a game, not my place in my own work. Wade lingered near the door. He looked at me with that practiced warmth. He said, "I hope you understand. This is business." I nodded once, not agreement, not surrender, just acknowledgement. Then I walked out past the glass walls, the framed mission statement about trust, the break room where someone laughed like nothing had happened. I rode the elevator down with my face still and my mind sharp. Outside, the cold hit my lungs. I climbed into my car, set my coffee in the cup holder, and placed both hands on the steering wheel. The parking lot was brighter now, filling with employees who still believed the day would be normal. I did not cry. I did not call my husband. I did not start the engine. I sat there and watched the building like you watch a place after you realize it's not what you thought it was. I listened to the quiet and felt it settle into something solid. They had rewritten the story. They thought I would accept it because I was tired, because I was polite, because I had spent years being the dependable one. I let my breathing slow and kept watching, not with anger, but with attention, like someone mapping. Chapter 2. Silence is not surrender. The engine stayed off as people began filing into the building, carrying coffee and backpacks and the casual confidence of people who believed their workday would unfold the way it always had. I stayed where I was a little longer, letting the moment settle into memory, not because I wanted to relive it, but because I needed to understand it. By the time I drove home that evening, the story had already started changing. At first, it was subtle, a message from a colleague asking if I was okay, followed by another asking if I was thinking about leaving, a calendar invite for a planning meeting that no longer included my name. A Slack channel I had created years ago went quiet without explanation. No one said anything directly, but absence has a language of its own, and I was starting to understand its grammar. The next morning, when I walked into the office, conversations dipped just enough to register. Not silence, not avoidance, just a slight lowering of volume, like people adjusting instinctively to a new rule they had not been given out loud. Someone from marketing stopped me near the coffee machine and said she had heard things were shifting, but that leadership knew what they were doing. She said it gently, as if she were offering comfort instead of repeating a verdict. I smiled and thanked her. Then I went back to my desk and logged in. The dashboard loaded exactly as it always had. Alerts blinked, systems responded, a client ticket came in flagged urgent, and my fingers moved without thinking. The work did not care who presented it. It did not care whose name was on the slide. That steadiness was grounding, and for a few hours, it was enough. That night at home, Cole noticed the quiet before I said a word. He leaned against the kitchen counter while I set groceries down, watching me the way he does when he senses a storm but does not know which direction it will break. He asked how the meeting went. I told him what had happened, the deck, the wording, the shift in recording. I kept my voice even, like I was recounting someone else's story. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, eyes focused but worried. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. He said maybe it was temporary, maybe it was just for the investor phase. He said these things happen when companies grow, that leadership wants a clean narrative. He reminded me that I had already proven myself, that my reputation was solid. Then he said something else, softer. He said he did not want me to get hurt fighting something that might resolve itself. I asked him what fighting meant. He hesitated, then said pushing back publicly, making things uncomfortable, being labeled difficult. He said labels stick, especially to women. I did not argue with him. He was not wrong. We had a mortgage, we had health insurance through my job, we had plans that assumed stability. Cole was thinking about our life, not just my pride. I told him I understood, and I meant it. Understanding did not make the tightness in my chest go away, but it kept it from turning into anger. A few days later, I drove to my parents' house in Oak Park for Sunday dinner. My mother, Linda, was 70 and still believed deeply in the power of harmony. She hugged me tightly at the door, then stepped back and searched my face as if she expected visible damage. Dinner started with small talk, weather, neighbors, a cousin's wedding I had not attended. Then, halfway through the meal, she asked how work was going. The question carried weight. I knew she had heard something. Family always does. I gave her the shortened version. restructuring, shifting roles, new priorities. She shook her head and said companies do that. She said it was business, not personal. She said the important thing was to stay gracious. No one likes a sore loser. The words stung more than I expected. Across the table, my sister, Paige, looked up from her plate. She was 40 and had learned early how to read power dynamics in rooms I preferred to avoid. She said if someone was taking credit for my work, it was not because I failed, it was because they could. My mother frowned at her and said there was no need to stir things up. Paige shrugged and looked at me. She said sometimes peace is just another word for silence, and silence can be expensive. The table went still. Forks paused. My father cleared his throat and changed the subject. No one raised their voice, but something important had surfaced and then been carefully buried again. Driving home that night, I felt the loneliness of standing between two truths, one that promised safety if I stayed quiet, and one that demanded honesty if I wanted to respect myself. At work, the pattern sharpened. I received an invite to a product alignment meeting later that week. When I joined, I realized I was the only one in the room without final decision authority. Halfway through, Wade suggested we document changes for efficiency. He slid a printed page across the table toward me. It was a role clarification form, carefully worded, temporary adjustments, streamlined approvals. My signature line waited at the bottom. I asked if I could review it and get back to him. He smiled and said of course, adding that moving quickly would help everyone stay aligned. Aligned. Another word that sounded harmless until it repeated itself enough times to become a warning. I took the paper back to my desk and read it slowly. Nothing illegal, nothing overt, just a quiet narrowing of space, a way to make decisions without me while my name remained attached to the outcome. That was the moment I understood something essential. If I reacted emotionally, if I protested too loudly, I would become the story they were already shaping, the difficult woman, the one who couldn't handle change, the one who took things personally. So I did the opposite. I slowed down. I began saving things, not dramatically, not obsessively, just deliberately. Versions of documents, timestamps, meeting notes, calendar changes. I noted when approvals shifted hands and when metrics changed slightly between drafts. I did not accuse anyone. I did not confront anyone. I watched. At night, after Cole went to bed, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open and sorted files into folders labeled only by date. I was not building a case, not yet. I was building clarity. The gossip continued. A coworker asked if I was planning to take a sabbatical. Another said she heard Wade was stepping in to represent Sentinel personally. Someone else suggested maybe I wanted a break after such an intense project. I smiled, I nodded, and I said I was taking things one day at a time. Inside, fear came and went in waves. Fear of being erased, fear of becoming small in someone else's story, fear that if I waited too long, there would be nothing left to protect. There were nights when doubt crept in quietly. When the house was dark and the world felt very still, I wondered if my mother was right, if grace was safer, if letting go was the adult thing to do. Then I would open a document and see my work altered just enough to be unrecognizable, and the doubt would retreat. One afternoon, Paige called me on her lunch break. She asked if I was okay. I said I was managing. She said waiting does not mean surrender. She said people underestimate patience because it doesn't look like power. I thanked her and sat in my car for a few minutes after the call ended, letting that settle. By the end of the week, I had not signed anything. No one pressured me openly. The tension stayed polite, professional, almost friendly. That made it harder, not easier. But something in me had shifted. I was no longer trying to be seen. I was trying to see. Each day, the picture sharpened, not because anyone confessed, but because patterns rarely hide forever. And the longer I waited, the more the truth arranged itself, quietly, on its own terms. Chapter 3. The truth doesn't rush. I started treating time like an ally instead of a threat, trusting that if I stayed steady long enough, the shape of things would reveal itself. The first step was finding someone who understood rules not as suggestions, but as gravity. I did not ask coworkers for recommendations. I did not search on company devices. One afternoon, I drove downtown and parked a few blocks away from the river, then walked up a narrow stairwell above a dry cleaner whose sign had not changed in decades. The attorney's name was Ellen Park. She was in her early 60s, silver hair pulled back, glasses resting low on her nose. Her office was small and orderly, shelves lined with binders labeled by year. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm and unhurried. She asked me to start at the beginning and then stopped me 10 minutes in. "Slow down," she said. "Facts first, feelings later, if at all." I told her about Sentinel, about the deck, about the meeting, about the form I had been asked to sign. I laid out the documents I had already saved, not dramatically, just one by one. She studied them in silence, flipping pages, checking timestamps. "This isn't about being treated unfairly," she said finally. "This is about process. Process leaves footprints." She asked who had access to investor materials and when, who approved revisions, who controlled final distribution. She asked whether I had received anything in writing that altered my authority or limited my ability to speak. I answered carefully, realizing that the habit I had developed of documenting quietly was not instinctive self-protection, it was groundwork. Ellen told me to keep doing exactly what I was doing. Save everything. Do not confront, do not threaten, do not hint. She said credibility is lost when emotion outruns evidence. "Truth doesn't rush," she said, "it stacks." Back at Northgate, Wade looked relaxed, almost buoyant. He walked the halls with easy confidence, stopping to chat, laughing a little louder than usual. He announced a series of town halls to keep everyone informed and aligned, his favorite word lately. In one of those meetings, he spoke about Sentinel as if it had always been his vision. He used my diagrams without acknowledgement. I sat near the back and watched people nod, watched younger engineers take notes, absorbing not just information, but posture. Afterward, a coworker forwarded me a screenshot from an internal discussion thread I no longer had access to. A manager wondered aloud whether Sentinel had become too dependent on a single technical voice in the past. Another replied that leadership was correcting that imbalance. My name never appeared. It did not need to. Rumors drifted in from the edges, that I was burned out, that I had asked for less responsibility, that I preferred not to lead. Each version softened the truth until it sounded reasonable. I did not correct them. I focused on patterns. Every time Wade presented Sentinel externally, the numbers improved slightly. Response times trimmed, risk reduction nudged higher. Not enough to raise alarms on their own, enough to impress someone who wanted to be impressed. Late at night, I lined up versions side by side. I traced changes back through logs. I noted who uploaded what and when. I did not speculate about intent. The sequence spoke for itself. One afternoon, Tessa stopped by my desk. She stood longer than necessary, eyes flicking toward the hallway before meeting mine. "Things are tense," she said quietly. "The board is asking a lot of questions." I asked if she had concerns about the data. She paused, then said leadership had it handled. Her voice was careful. I recognized it. Survival without allegiance. A few days later, Monica, our general counsel, emailed asking to schedule a check-in. "Just a conversation," she wrote. We met in a glass conference room where reflections made it hard to tell who was watching whom. Monica folded her hands neatly and smiled. She said she wanted to make sure I felt supported during the transition. She said change can be uncomfortable, especially for people who care deeply. I told her I was focused on accuracy and compliance. Her smile thinned. She reminded me of confidentiality obligations and the importance of unified messaging during sensitive periods. "I understand my obligations," I said. She watched me closely, waiting. I gave her nothing. When the meeting ended, she thanked me for being reasonable. I understood then that reasonableness had become a test. A week later, Ellen called. "There's been a trigger," she said, "not from you." During routine investor due diligence, an outside consultant had flagged discrepancies between versions of Sentinel materials, minor but enough to require explanations. Explanations would require documentation. Documentation would require logs. She told me to stay calm, she told me to stay silent. At the office, the mood shifted. Wade stopped lingering in hallways, meetings moved behind closed doors, his emails grew longer, sent later at night, clarifying points no one had questioned out loud. One afternoon, Wade copied me unexpectedly in a message asking if I could confirm a specific metric from an early draft. I replied with the number from the version I had approved and attached the file with the timestamp visible. There was no response. The next day, I overheard two coworkers whispering near the elevators. One said maybe Nora wasn't as collaborative as people thought. The other replied that leadership was correcting that imbalance. I kept walking. That afternoon, Paige texted asking how things were going. I wrote back that the truth was taking its time. She replied that people get careless when they think they are safe. Wade proved her right during an all-hands call. He referenced a Sentinel feature removed months ago due to reliability issues. When someone asked about it in the chat, he brushed it off and moved on. I saved the recording. By the end of the month, the board announced the formation of a special review committee framed as proactive governance. No accusations, no names. But the air had changed. Wade stopped making eye contact with me. Monica avoided scheduling meetings. Tessa delegated decisions downward, creating distance. One evening, as I packed my bag, I saw Wade alone in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight. For the first time, he looked uncertain. At home, Cole asked if things were getting worse. I said they're getting clearer. That night, I organized my files one last time, not to add anything, but to see the full picture laid out in order. It was all there, every adjustment, every assumption that no one would notice. I closed my laptop, feeling neither triumph nor fear. The system was moving now, slowly, deliberately, and the day they felt safest was already behind them. Chapter 4. When Everything Falls Apart at Once. The shift became impossible to ignore once the questions stopped being whispered and started arriving with calendar invites attached, formal ones with carefully chosen titles and lists of required attendees. It began with an email marked confidential that landed in my inbox early on a Monday morning. The subject line mentioned an internal review committee. The message was neutral, almost polite, full of phrases like proactive governance and standard procedure. No accusations, no conclusions, just a request for cooperation and document retention. By noon, the entire building felt different. Wade called an emergency leadership meeting that afternoon. When I walked into the conference room, he was already there, standing instead of sitting, pacing near the windows that overlooked the parking lot. His jacket was still on, his phone face down on the table. The ease he usually carried was gone, replaced by something tight and restless. He looked up when I entered and smiled too quickly. "Nora, glad you could make it." The meeting itself was short and strangely hollow. Wade spoke in broad terms about transparency and growth. Monica outlined the review process with practiced calm. Tessa took notes without expression. Everyone avoided specifics, as if naming details might cause the floor to drop out from under us. When it ended, Wade asked me to stay behind. Monica and Tessa left first. The door clicked shut, and the room felt smaller without witnesses. Wade leaned against the table, folded his arms, then unfolded them again. "I want to be very clear," he said. "This is procedural. These reviews happen all the time." "I understand," I said. He exhaled and softened his tone. "You've been here a long time. You care about this company. You don't want to see it destabilized." I stayed silent. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We can make this easier for everyone." He slid a folder across the table toward me. "We're prepared to offer you a generous transition package," he said. "Severance, an advisory title, continued association with Sentinel in a non-operational role." I looked at the folder but did not open it. "And a confidentiality agreement," he added. "Standard language, temporary, just until things settle." I opened it then. The pages were crisp, the language smooth. Appreciation for past contributions, mutual respect, no admission of wrongdoing, silence framed as professionalism. I closed it and slid it back to him. "I'm not planning to leave, and I'm not signing anything that limits my ability to speak truthfully if asked." His jaw tightened. "This isn't about truth. It's about protecting what we've built." I met his eyes. "What you've built," I said. The words landed heavily between us. He straightened, his expression cooling. "Think about it," he said. "This doesn't need to get ugly." "I already have," I said. I left the room without looking back. My heart was steady, my hands calm. I felt no victory, only a sense of alignment, like a decision had finally finished forming. By the end of that week, the review expanded. An outside firm was brought in, requests for documentation arrived daily, logs were pulled, version histories examined, calendars compared. The language stayed neutral, but the scope widened. Wade stopped appearing in common areas. His name disappeared from internal announcements. Meetings that once revolved around his presence now happened without him. People noticed. The office changed in subtle ways. Conversations ended when leadership walked by, doors closed more often, laughter in the break room softened into murmurs. Everyone moved carefully, as if the building itself were listening. I stayed where I was, doing my work. I answered questions when asked. I provided files without commentary. When investigators requested clarification, I responded with dates, timestamps, and facts, nothing more. One afternoon, Monica stopped by my desk. She looked tired in a way I had never seen before. "This process is stressful for everyone," she said. "I know," I replied. She hesitated, then said, "Discretion matters right now." "So does accuracy," I said. She nodded slowly and walked away. The findings came quietly. There was no dramatic announcement, no emergency all hands, just a series of closed-door meetings and updates to internal documentation. Wade was placed on administrative leave pending further review. The board issued a brief statement emphasizing accountability and transparency. Sentinel was reassigned to a cross-functional leadership group. No one said misconduct, no one needed to. The facts spoke without raising their voice. When the news reached my family, the reactions were restrained. My mother called first. "I heard there were changes at your company," she said carefully. "Yes," I replied. She paused. "I suppose you were right to be cautious." It was not an apology. It did not need to be. Paige texted later that evening. "You okay?" "I am," I wrote back. "Good," she replied. "You held your ground." At home, Cole watched me closely, waiting for anger or relief or something dramatic to surface. One night, as we sat at the kitchen table, he finally said, "I didn't realize how much they were asking you to swallow." I looked at him and smiled faintly. "I didn't either," I said. He reached across the table and took my hand. We sat there without speaking, the silence easy and earned. The final board meeting came 2 weeks later. I was invited to present a technical overview of Sentinel as part of the restructuring discussion. When I entered the room, several faces avoided my eyes. Others met them briefly, then looked away. I presented calmly and clearly, no embellishment, no defensiveness. I answered questions directly and deferred where appropriate. I did not mention the past. When it ended, the board chair thanked me for my professionalism. I nodded. As I gathered my things, one of the directors said quietly, "We should have listened sooner." I did not respond. Wade cleared out his office after hours a few days later. I saw him once in the hallway as he carried a box toward the exit. He looked smaller somehow, not defeated, just stripped of certainty. He nodded when he saw me. I nodded back. No words passed between us. That night, driving home through streets slick with early spring rain, I thought about how close I had come to disappearing quietly, how easy it would have been to accept the folder, to choose comfort over clarity. I had not destroyed anyone. I had not taken anything that was not already mine. I had simply stopped losing ground I never should have had to give up. As the building receded in my rearview mirror, the road ahead felt open in a way it had not for a long time, steady and unforced, waiting to be chosen. Chapter 5. After the win, who am I now? The days that followed felt quieter than I expected. Not empty, just spacious, like a room after furniture has been moved and you can finally see how much space there was all along. Northgate did not collapse. It did not become a cautionary headline. It adjusted, slowly, deliberately. Interim leadership stepped in, meetings returned to agendas that meant something, and the constant urgency that had ruled every decision began to loosen its grip. Sentinel continued to run without interruption. Clients stayed. Systems did what they had always done, quietly protecting people who would never know my name. For the first time in years, I took time away without checking my email. Cole and I drove north toward the lake and rented a small house with creaky floors and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. We spent mornings drinking coffee slowly, watching the water change color as the sun climbed. There were no alerts, no calendar reminders, no explanations required. On the third day, Cole finally said what had been sitting with him. "I didn't realize how much of yourself you were carrying alone." I watched a gull skim the surface of the water before answering. "I didn't either," I said, "not until I stopped." He nodded, then added quietly, "I was afraid you'd lose everything." I turned toward him. "I was afraid I'd lose myself," I said. He reached for my hand and squeezed it, and that was enough. When we returned home, the world did not rush me. It waited. A board member asked if I would consider a formal leadership role within the new structure. A recruiter reached out, careful and indirect, saying my name had surfaced in conversations where it had not before. An engineer I barely knew sent a message thanking me for holding the line, saying it mattered more than I probably realized. I did not say yes to anything immediately. I went back to my desk. The office felt different now. Not cheerful, honest. People made eye contact. Conversations did not lower when someone walked by. The silence that remained no longer felt like avoidance. It felt like respect. One afternoon, Monica stopped me in the hallway. She looked tired, not defeated, just unarmored. "I wanted to say something," she said. I waited. "I should have listened earlier," she said. "I chose the company when I should have chosen the truth." I nodded. "You chose what you thought would protect you." She gave a small, ruleful smile. It didn't. We stood there for a moment, not as adversaries, not as allies, just as two people who had survived the same storm from different sides. Later that week, my mother called. Her voice was cautious. "Are you doing all right?" "I am," I said. She hesitated. "I worried you were making things harder than they needed to be." "I know," I replied. There was a pause. "I see now that staying quiet can be its own kind of loss," she said. It was not an apology. It did not need to be. Paige, as always, said less and meant more. "You look lighter," she said when we met for lunch. "I feel clearer," I answered. She lifted her glass. "To clarity." The decision about my role came a month later. The board offered me a position with real authority and defined boundaries, not symbolic, not provisional, written expectations, transparent reporting. They framed it as continuity. I heard it as acknowledgement. I asked for time. When I finally said yes, I did so on my own terms. Clear scope, clear accountability, clear protections. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because I understood what ambiguity costs. Walking back to my car that evening, I realized something else had shifted. I was no longer waiting for validation. The story had stopped being about what was taken and started being about what remained. There were losses. Trust does not snap back into place once it breaks. Some relationships never recovered their old ease. A few doors closed quietly and stayed that way. But what I gained was steadier. I slept through the night. I spoke more directly. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped shrinking my sentences to make other people comfortable. One night, as Cole and I cleaned up after dinner, he asked, "Do you ever wish you had handled it differently?" I thought about the folder Wade had slid across the table, about the version of myself that might have taken it just to make the tension stop. "No," I said. "I wish it hadn't happened, but I don't wish I had disappeared." He smiled and kissed my forehead. "I like this version of you." So did I. Months later, I ran into Wade unexpectedly at a coffee shop downtown. He looked surprised to see me, then quickly composed himself. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm well," I said. He nodded. "I'm glad." I believed he wanted to believe that himself. We exchanged polite goodbyes and went our separate ways. There was no bitterness, no victory lap, just distance, clean and final. Driving home, I thought about how power rarely announces its exit. It does not storm out. It fades. It loosens its hold. It leaves behind space for something quieter and more durable. Karma does not need an audience. It does not demand applause. It simply rebalances what was tilted for too long. That night, sitting alone in the living room, I looked around at the life I had almost shrunk to fit someone else's expectations. I had not destroyed anything. I had not won in the way stories like to promise. I had stood still enough for the truth to catch up. If you have ever been underestimated, quietly pushed aside, or told that staying silent was the price of peace, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated? Would you have stayed silent or spoken up? What did standing up for yourself cost you, and what did it give back? Sometimes the best revenge is not winning. It's finally being at peace.